Are you ready for some good news? The word commitment is the new profanity of a coming generation. Don't commit. You might miss out on something better. Why would I commit when I can have all the benefits of commitment without being tied down? Yet the gospel is all about commitment, but not how you might think. Only when you begin to understand the commitment that the Father has made to you do you begin to see how free your commitment to the Father becomes. Turn with me today to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. The headline read, "The Commitment Phobia Generation." In 1970, it said 21% of Americans had reached the age of 25 without getting married. But William Galston, the senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, went on to say, by 2005, that figure had grown to 60%, and by 2018, 72%. The number of adults in the population that live at home has increased by 50% since the 1970s. Galston says this of today's young adults: they are much less likely to have committed themselves to a mate or to a career. And many go back and forth between episodic education and temporary jobs, between living independently and in their parents' home. And although millennials sometimes get a bad rap for their fear of commitment, it really is true of all people. Pay-as-you-go gym membership and cell phone membership that's by the month or a la carte are on the rise. And the average church attender worships approximately 1.4 times per month, or once every 3 weeks. On Facebook, we all have hundreds of friends without any commitment to actually be their friend, as in being there to console them at 2 a.m. We can like someone's post without saying what we like about it, or accept someone's friend request without ever meeting them. I think we are all afraid of commitment because it restricts our freedom. It restricts our freedom to be responsive, spontaneous. And lack of commitment in our heart assures us we think that we won't miss out on something better. Today, as we continue our series called Unleashed, the title of this message is Freedom Through Commitment. See, what if commitment isn't restricting at all? What if you have been lied to about the true nature of commitment? What if commitment isn't actually bondage, but instead is a really beautiful kind of freedom? Remember, one of the great lies of our enemy is this: freedom comes outside of authority. So the serpent comes to Adam and Eve in the garden, and he says, if you really want to have freedom, you have to eat of that tree. Because if you eat of that tree, you will see as God sees. And if you see as God sees, you'll no longer need him. And once his authority, once his oppression is off of you, then you will find true freedom. In fact, the rejection of God's authority was so dramatic that God had to intervene cosmically with his Son to undo their rejection of authority. Because when they rejected it, they found bondage. And God, through Jesus, had to reestablish their freedom. We can find comfort in knowing that Jesus himself was abandoned. I am a child of divorce. My parents, by the time I was in kindergarten, had decided that their marriage would not work. And in some ways, I've found God's redemption throughout that story my whole life. But when brokenness happens in our story, it has implications for our entire life. And so as I look back at my life, some of the places that I have found myself to be the most insecure have been in places where I fear being abandoned. Because there's something about not growing up in a two-parent household that suggests there's always a risk of someone who you love and someone who loves you will leave. And so whether that was in my dating relationships or even in my marriage or even in my friendships, there's always this deep fear that I'm going to be abandoned, that someone's not going to find me lovable enough, smart enough, funny enough, whatever it might be, always not enough. And in that, they're going to reject me and I'm going to feel abandoned. Now, the good news about that is that one of the ways that God has bring deep gospel healing to my life is by reminding me that when I feel abandoned, I have a Father in heaven who sent his only begotten Son, who is now my brother, and he felt it too. And because he got victory over his abandonment, I can as well. See, taking up your cross daily is not just about being saved, but it's about knowing that when betrayal or abandonment or when opportunities to use your power and authority in ways that are not God-honoring and you allow those things to be suppressed for the benefit of others, or when you're being misunderstood or maligned, when all of those things happen in your life, when you're taking up those crosses like Jesus did, you know you're not alone. This is the very picture of redemption. It's the very story of what it means to be saved. The very story of being saved is to acknowledge that we were yet sinners. We use vernacular in the church, language in the church that to outsiders sounds like voodoo. Like, what does it mean when you say to be saved? I didn't know I needed to be rescued. Here, simply put, is what it means to be saved for the Christian. God is holy. We rejected him. Because God is holy, and we are no longer holy because of our rejection, we cannot be in the presence of a holy God. It would violate his holiness. If we don't look out for our own best interest, if we don't reserve the idea of being committed to things in ways in which we are always waiting for what, maybe you even say God's best. So we never commit. We never say yes. Here's the problem with commitment. I think in all of our hearts, we have a desire to do the right thing, to make commitments that we keep. Some of that is the simple day-to-day things, like just letting your yeses be yes and your nos be no. And then some of those are like enormous covenantal commitments, like marriage. But we have found in our own lives that even when we try, we can't keep the commitment. This is reflective of something of what we learned together this summer in the Proverbs, where like even when we know what wisdom looks like, we're unable to do it. Two paths diverge in the wood. One's wise, one's foolish. We know which one's wise. We try to walk to it. We just end up finding ourselves so often pulled over towards foolishness. And by allowing his Son to die in my place for my sins, the Father made a cosmic commitment in me that is an assurance that my story isn't over. Because when I begin to understand the depth and beauty of the Father's commitment to me, only then do I begin to understand I can't do it. Then by what power can I? Resurrection power. The Father's commitment to his Son didn't end with allowing him to die the death I should have died. But because Jesus never one time missed the mark, never one time violated the holiness of his Father, on Sunday morning, God the Father sent the Spirit to wake his Son up from the dead. And then for every person who ever places their faith in Jesus as King, Jesus shares that same Spirit with us. How is it possible that our yeses could be yes and our no's could be no? How is it possible that we could grow every day to be more like Jesus? How is it possible that we could be sent out into the world to ask the world one question, the same question that Jesus asked Peter, who do you say I am? That's the question we ask the world. Every tribe, every nation, every tongue, Who do you say Jesus is? By what authority do we make the commitments to let our yeses be yes, our noes be noes, to ask the world this one simple question, who do you say I am? God is so committed to you that he refused to allow you to stay where you were in eternal separation from him. And because he, the creator of the universe, is so committed to me, it empowers my commitment to be more like his son. And that's the gospel.